Hi everyone, my name is Trent, and today I will be going over how to count sig figs. So, when it comes to sig figs, it's very important to understand how they work because when it comes to reporting data or reporting things to the proper scientific notation or the proper amount of sig figs, it just makes everything so much easier and much more uniform. So, in order to count sig figs, I like to start by thinking about a map of the United States. Alright, so here is my quick and dirty sketch of the United States. So, if we think about just our geography, if we look on the left side or the west coast of the United States, we know that this is the Pacific Ocean. Meanwhile, on the east coast, New York, New Jersey, that kind of area, we have our Atlantic Ocean. In mind, it's very important to remember that our Pacific Ocean is on the west coast or the left side, and on our east coast is our Atlantic Ocean, or our Atlantic Ocean is on the right side. Now, I underlined this P and this A because I actually have a method of determining the sig figs from a sig fig having a decimal present for P, having a decimal present for P, and having a decimal absent for A. Okay, now let's get down to the nitty gritty. So, if we have a sig fig with a decimal present, decimal is present, we're going to read the whole entire sig fig from the Pacific Ocean here, Pacific Ocean, going towards the Atlantic, or in other words, left to right. So again, we read it from Pacific towards the Atlantic, or in other words, from left to right, and we start with the first non-zero number. Okay, so to practice this one, when we have a decimal present, I have given some example problems, so go ahead and try these first on your own. Okay, perfect. Welcome back. So, in order to do this, we have to think first, right? So we think, okay, let me analyze this number. We see that there is a decimal present right there. So with that decimal present, we think to ourselves, okay, decimal present, we read from P, Pacific, to the Atlantic. So we read left to the right, and we start with our first non-zero number. So non-zero number. And now, let's give it a try. So first, okay, example A. We have a 0, okay. That does not count because it doesn't follow this rule. It's not a non-zero number. So we go to the next one. That is not a sig fig. 0, again, not a sig fig. Again, 0, not a sig fig. Here we are, 4. That satisfies this rule of it being a non-zero digit, and we have been reading it from left to right. So, now we start counting here. That's 1 sig fig. Now we continue counting to the right. 5, another sig fig. And in this case, this 0 does count as a sig fig. Now, I have to clarify, when I said that this 0 in this case counts as a sig fig, it is because it follows these other sig figs and there is a decimal present. Trust me, the more examples we do, the more confident you'll feel. So, in this term, we can say that there are a total of 3 sig figs. Okay, now, let's go to the next example, B. So, again, I'm analyzing it, and I see there's a decimal present, 7.080 kilometers. So, again, I think decimal present, P, present, means I read from left to right, or from the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the Atlantic, left to right. Okay, let's start. First number I have, 7. Now, I should understand that 7 is a non-zero digit, so that counts as a sig fig. Next one, after this 0 counts as a sig fig, this 8 is a non-zero, it also counts, and this 0 after the 8 also counts because of that decimal being present. So when we have this decimal present, it's almost as if we're saying, after we hit our first non-zero, all the zeros that come afterwards do count as significant figures. So make sure you really understand that. When there is a decimal present and we satisfy our criteria of counting the first non-zero, all the zeros to the right of that non-zero count as sig figs. So in this number, there are 4 sig figs. Okay, everyone, so going to our third example. Now, the same process applies, right? So let's see, I'm going to scan and analyze this whole entire number. Boom. Right there, we have our decimal present. So again, decimal present means we're going to read P, present, from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, or from left to right. So 0. Okay, remember, that's a non-zero digit, so it does not count. We start first, left to right. First non-zero, we start counting. So 0 does not count. Decimal 0 doesn't count because it's a 0. It's not a non-zero number. Now we hit our first non-zero digit right here, number 2. 2 counts. That's our first sig fig. Now, remember what I said on example B. Once we count our first non-zero digit, everything to the right of that, even if it's a 0, is considered a sig fig. So this 0 is also a sig fig because it is after our first non-zero digit. Next, this 6, definitely a sig fig. And this last 0 right here, because like I said again, just to reiterate, since I already counted my first non-zero number reading from left to right, all the numbers afterwards will be a sig fig when there is a decimal present. So 4. So again, in this example, I have 4 total sig figs. Alright everyone, so now let's go into the examples where we may not have a decimal present. So in my last rule, remember, I said when there's a decimal P for present, we read from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Atlantic, or from left to right. Now, when there is a decimal absent, or there's no decimal there, A for absent, we're going to read from the Atlantic, from the right, going towards the Pacific, right going to left. So, let's just get started with some examples so you guys can feel more comfortable with it. So let's get started with some examples here. So, same process as the last one. I'm going to analyze all of A, and I notice I have 500. I don't have a decimal or anything, so I think to myself, okay, there's a decimal absent. Absent starts with A, Atlantic starts with A, so that's my sign. I'm going to read the number starting from the Atlantic Ocean and go towards the Pacific, or in other words, read it from right going to the left. So, all right, let's start right here. We'll start right here. And I notice I have to start with the first non-zero number. Okay, 0. 0 is a 0, so this one does not count. No. Another 0, still reading from right to left. This one does not count. Here we go. Now we have a non-zero digit, a 5. So, in this case, 500 grams only has 1 sig fig. Change my color on this next one. Now, let's look at this number, 4,500 meters per second. Now, same thing. Let's scan this entire number, and we notice there's a decimal absent. Remember, absent, A, Atlantic. Another sign for us to read from right, or the Atlantic Ocean, going towards the Pacific, or reading it from right to left. So let's start on the very rightmost number, 0. 0 is a 0 number, so we cannot include that. So this one is canceled. Next, let's go to the next number. Another 0 does not count. Here we go. 5. That is our first non-zero number, so that is our first sig fig. And now continuing right to left, 4. 4 is a non-zero number, and we're done. So from this number, we have 2 sig figs. Perfect. All right, next example. Same thing, 2,000 grams. Remember, I don't see any decimals, so that means a decimal is absent. Absent a Atlantic. I'm reading from Atlantic to the Pacific from right to left. Let's start. 0, that's a 0 digit, doesn't count. Next one, 0, does not count. Another 0 does not count. Here we are. This is our first non-zero digit, and that does count. So in 2,000 grams, we have 1 sig fig. Now, example D, the same philosophy applies, right? So I'm going to analyze this big old number here, 8,900,000 milliliters. So I'm scanning. Okay, in this example, there's also no decimal present, or a decimal is absent. Absent. Atlantic. I'm reading from the Atlantic going towards the Pacific Ocean. Or, in other words, from the right side to the left. Now let's start. 0. That's a 0, it doesn't count. It's not a non-zero number, so we skip it. Same thing with this 0 and this 0. Same for this 0, this 0. Here we are. 9. 9 is a non-zero number, and we've been following the rule of reading it from right to left. So this is a non-zero, and that is a sig fig. Next, if we go to 8, that is also a sig fig, so that also counts. So in total, we have 2 sig figs. So now you guys are asking me, so Trent, if we have a number and there's not just a bunch of zeros in the end, how are we going to count it? Well, remember, same philosophy applies through the whole entire thing. If we count and analyze this number, 809 grams, so we notice there's a decimal absent. Absent, A, Atlantic to Pacific, or in other words, from Atlantic to the Pacific, from right to left again. Let's start on the very rightmost digit, which is a 9. Oh, right there. 9 is a non-zero digit, so that counts. Let me change the color for you guys. Here we are. This counts. Now, right to left, boom. Even though, notice, even though this is a 0, since I already have my first sig fig with the 9, this 0 is also included. Because it's, in a sense, it's sandwiched between 2 sig figs. And since we start with our first non-zero, the zeros following our first non-zero will be significant. So, 9 is a sig fig. This 0 is a sig fig. It's following our first non-zero, which is a sig fig. And this 8 is obviously a sig fig as well. So in this case, we have 3 sig figs. Now, this is a big old number, right? I don't even know what number this is. Let me see. 1, 2, 3. 730,405 kilograms, right? That is freaking heavy. So, the same thing goes through this whole entire process that we just did for all of these ones. Let's analyze this. There is no decimal present. A decimal is absent. A, absent, Atlantic. I'm reading again, Atlantic to the Pacific, or right to left. Now, I'm only saying this so much because I really want it to be drilled in your guys' minds and, be instilled in your long-term memory. So, we start right to left with our first non-zero. Right here. Right to left. Okay, 5. That is definitely a sig fig. 1. 0. Remember, like I said from earlier, we start with our first non-zero, and as we're reading from right to left, after I hit my first non-zero, the zeros in the middle of them will count. Okay? So, 5 is a sig fig. 0 is a sig fig because it's sandwiched between these two and because it follows my first non-zero number. 4 is definitely a sig fig. With this 0, the same philosophy applies. It's after my first non-zero, so it does count. 4. 3, definitely. And 7, definitely. So, we know in this in this big old number, we have 6 sig figs here. And so, now we are going to recap all the information we have just learned. So, remember, I like to think about sig figs like a map of the United States. When there is a decimal present, let me change this font for you guys. Here we go. Present, decimal. I want you to remember, decimal present is Pacific, and we read Pacific from left to right, or the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. Pacific to the Atlantic, or from left going to the right. And we always start with our first non-zero number. Now, when we have a decimal absent, decimal is absent, remember this A. Absent, Atlantic. And now we're reading from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So we're going to start reading from Atlantic to the Pacific, or from right to left. And we also start with our first non-zero. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments. If there's anything else you'd like me to teach or any ideas you need to be clarified, just let me know and I'll try my best. Thank you.